Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance Podcast, Episode 26, Road Trip and Late Night Christology, with guest Eric Miller. I'm Mark Kane. When I interviewed Kenny Willenberg back in March of 2021, Episode 17, Fellowship Effectively, Less Frequently, I put the event we talked about on my calendar and hoped it would work out. Well, it did, and I went. I got to meet a few of my past guests for the first time in person, which was fantastic. It isn't easy to put into words how it feels. You get to know someone remotely, you see them on a screen, you hear their voice in your headset, you come to love and appreciate them, they become your friend, and yet you've never met. When I was in the last hour of my 9-hour drive to the 20s and 30s conference, I knew I would soon be seeing at least 5 people in person for the first time, people I had spoken with at length, several I interviewed as guests for this podcast. In that last hour of my drive, I quietly, alone in my car, welled up with a bit of emotion. You know those videos where a wife is waiting in the airport for her husband to return from military service? It was a bit like that. Well, maybe only 5% as emotional as that, but that's what it reminded me of. Having people in our lives who we can love is a precious gift from God. Being with them in person is like gold. I'm looking forward to having that experience again this fall at the UCA Conference. I'll have a few more words on that after the interview. But first, a quick reminder. The Unitarian Christian Alliance is an online resource, a tool for connecting Unitarian Christians. To clarify, Trinitarian Christians believe that God is a being consisting of 3 persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Us Unitarian Christians are those who believe that the only true God is the Father, and that Jesus is his human Messiah. Members of the UCA are those who can agree with this affirmation. As a result, there are differences among the UCA members on many things. In fact, there are differences on Christology too, which may surprise you. I mean, how many perspectives exist which can yet agree with that affirmation? Well, there are more than one. The UCA has remained deliberately broad enough to allow for these kinds of differences. It isn't that we don't think it matters, or that all truth is relative. It's because there wasn't a place where folks could land when they felt isolated for giving up Trinitarianism. They want to know who else is out there. They want to connect with people, especially if they've lost fellowship for committing to what they found in Scripture. The UCA fills that gap. It provides a place where they can start their journey, more like transportation, not a destination. It's like the airplane, not the Bahamas. And it works. For decades, I interacted with people in my own affiliation, and I was vaguely aware of some of the others. But now, I've met more people from outside my group than I can even count. Eric is one of these interactions. Well, Eric, I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We met at the 20s and 30s conference. At that conference, you showed up, and I didn't know at the time that nobody else knew who you were. But maybe before we talk about that, let's get to know you a little. So tell me about your background.
I was born and raised in Champaign, Illinois. I have 5 older siblings.
Ooh.
I was raised in the Christian churches and Churches of Christ.
Okay.
Moved to Cincinnati, Ohio in 2015 for school, and that's where I have been ever since.
I see. What school is it?
Right now, I'm at God's Bible School and College.
Okay. Is that a big school?
It is not a big school. We're a tiny school, but it has a very large online class community, which is what I'm a part of. Even though I'm in Cincinnati, I'm taking classes online so I can work.
Ah, it's cool. How old are you?
I'll be 26 next week.
Okay. So how long have you been a Unitarian Christian?
Yeah, just a couple of years.
Were you already going to the Bible college before?
I was. I was studying at a different school at that time, but it was still a Christian university. I was studying ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I really started to think about the doctrine of the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
Began to kind of question whether or not it was really something that the Scripture taught.
Was there something that triggered you to look into that?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. The story really starts back when I was in my early teens. I read a gentleman by the name of Barton Stone. He was the first half of the Stone Campbell movement,
Okay.
which is the movement that I was born into. He was actually not a Trinitarian. He had views that could be properly described as Arian.
Okay.
And so from a very young age, even though we all believed in the Trinity and the church that we belonged to more or less believed in the Trinity, I had this strong conviction that a person didn't have to believe in the Trinity in order to be saved, because here's the founder of our movement who was very clearly a godly Christian man who didn't believe the Trinity was biblical. So even though I believed in it, I didn't think it was a necessary doctrine.
Okay.
So that kind of started like the seeds of, okay, it's important, but it's maybe not as essential as many people make it out to be.
All right. So you had that already in your mind by the time you were going off to college.
Right. And I had discussions with Jehovah's Witnesses in particular. That was an area of interest of mine. It still is.
Mm-hmm.
And, tried to convince them that the Trinity was true and was biblical. And I myself was really quite convinced, to be perfectly honest with you. But there was a certain point in these conversations with the witnesses where I said to myself, I cannot ask them to be willing to change their beliefs and in doing so change the trajectory of their lives if I'm not willing to do the same thing. So I have to really be willing to examine the doctrine of the Trinity from the Bible, look at what the Bible actually says, and then follow the evidence where it leads.
Yeah.
And I was quite confident. I wasn't scared to do that at all because I was sure that it would come out that the Trinity was true and biblical.
Okay.
It would have been around 2015 that I actually started studying with the witnesses in a different light. So I was studying not to try to convert them. I was studying because I was starting to be concerned about my own church and where I stood and things of that nature.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. So did you approach them and say, hey, let's have a Bible study together?
That's exactly what I did. I didn't have a car at the time, and I took my bicycle and rode down to the local Kingdom Hall and basically showed up fresh meat.
Yeah.
We sat in the service, and an elder came up to me afterwards and said, would you like to have a Bible study? And I said, yeah, I'd love to have a Bible study. So
Wow. They don't expect that, I guess.
they were very surprised.
All right. So did you regularly attend, or was this just for the Bible study?
Well, I was not a regular attender, but I studied with them for over a year. I mean, this was on a weekly basis. I never really went to meetings regularly because I was still in my own church.
Okay.
But it was the irony of this is that it really wasn't the witnesses that convinced me anything about the Trinity. It was as I was reading arguments to be able to respond to the kinds of things that the witnesses were saying that slowly but surely I noticed that evangelical scholars were saying things in commentaries and in academic literature that they may not be saying in their churches and that we're certainly not hearing from our pulpits in terms of Trinitarian proof texts.
Okay.
And through that study, all the proof texts that I had in my mind for the Trinity, one by one, started to fall by the wayside until finally I actually listened to the debate between Dale Tuggy and Michael Brown.
Okay.
And by the end of that debate, I kind of looked at myself and said, wow, I guess I don't believe in the Trinity anymore. That was really the formal end of my life as a Trinitarian Christian.
I see. Were the Jehovah's Witnesses happy to hear that, or did you go and let them know? Or
Yeah, I mean, the witnesses were very pleased and surprised. I think everything went in the direction that they were wanting it to go in, except the fact that I just, in the end, of course, didn't join their religion.
Okay. So, it's like the one that got away.
Exactly.
But that's cool. So you were at college at this time. You're attending a Church of Christ. You're moonlighting in Bible studies. You change your theology.
Yeah.
And now, so how does this unfold while you're still at college then?
To be honest with you, there were so many things that were going on at campus within our movement, and I won't go into all of that. A lot of theological changes that were happening, and I was involved in enough theological controversies with some of my fellow students that the Trinity was honestly not even on the radar.
Okay.
unlike a lot of evangelical denominations, we really don't stress it. So I was never worried that I was going to get kicked out. I was never worried that I was going to be ostracized by my fellow peers. I was worried about passing classes and and doing some other things. But it was honestly, it just like I knew I didn't believe in it anymore. And then I moved on to the next thing.
Okay. So then you showed up at the 20s and 30s conference, and none of us really knew who you were.
Yeah.
How did you end up coming to this event in the first place?
Sure. So I think it was Kenny Willenberg who posted about the 20s and 30s conference in the UCA Facebook group.
Okay.
I was immediately intrigued by the 20s and 30s title because that is my demographic. And, it was interesting because I had really tried to get to Converge. I had car troubles. I wasn't able to go. And I was really disappointed with that. And I really had not had a whole lot of luck in meeting other people who believed similar to myself about the Father alone being the only true God. And when I saw that it was in Paducah, Kentucky, well, I live in Cincinnati, which is basically on the border of Kentucky. And I thought to myself, that can't be that far away. And so I Googled it and saw that it was, I don't know, maybe like a little under 5 hours. And I was really intrigued. What's the worst that can happen? I was really interested in meeting some people and having that fellowship and seeing what was up.
Yeah. So I also went, and this was where we met for the first time in person. I got confused, and when it said 20s and 30s, I thought it was like 20 and 30 edition. And since that's
20s and 30s at heart.
Yeah, that's what it was. And so when you got there was a few of us who recognized you once you acknowledged that you were that guy on Facebook. And then people were like, oh, we've seen your post in Facebook. I appreciated that you did that. You got in the car and came to something where you didn't know anybody personally. Were you nervous about that?
Honestly, I wasn't nervous until I pulled up to the driveway. I pulled up to the driveway and I saw the cars and, oh my goodness, what have I done? And I walked to the door and, I knocked and knocked so quietly because I was scared. I'm like, I don't want to scare anybody. And nobody's coming to the door. And I was thinking to myself, they probably all know each other. This is probably really just kind of like a get together of close friends. They all go to the same church, just all these kind of things running through my mind at the time. But it was Laura Willenberg, who opened the door and who greeted me and with her lovely smiling face. And just a couple minutes into it, I felt at home. I was in their kitchen eating food maybe 3 minutes after I arrived, so it couldn't have been that bad.
Yeah. So the event was at a fellow's house. It was John Truitt. He opened up his house to the whole group. I think we were somewhere in the 30s, close to 40 total of people who came. So it was a good-sized crowd. I thoroughly enjoyed the event. It was the first time I'd ever gone to one. I had decided to go back when I interviewed Kenny. I was like, I'm going to see if I can do this because what a nice follow-up to have an episode talking about having events, then go to the event, and then follow up with a discussion about it. I was very relaxed. It was nice to not edit podcasts for a weekend. And I'm interested in what you thought of how that weekend went.
It was a delight for me. It was large enough to not be awkward, but small enough to still be intimate, if that makes any sense at all. It was something that I really needed. One of the things that was so important for me when I changed my belief on the doctrine of the Trinity was to not wall myself off from other Christians. Sometimes I worry about in kind of the broader Unitarian community is that because people are so spread out and maybe because people don't feel comfortable in a mainstream church, they don't get any kind of fellowship at all. And I think that that's very dangerous. I think that the Bible talks a lot about the importance of fellowship. And I was just trying to put my money where my own mouth was, to not kind of be in my own little echo chamber, but to be able to go and talk to these other believers. To be honest, I was a little bit nervous because I knew that most of the people there were Biblical Unitarians. But when you get together with these people and you're not just talking about those kinds of things that are important things, but you're not just talking about those kinds of things, but you get together and you're praying for each other and you're singing with each other. And I don't have to worry what lyrics are going to come up because I know we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And just to get to hear people's stories and to eat and to go, see the sights together. It was really just beautiful Christian fellowship.
It truly was. I loved it. So yes, most of the people there were Biblical Unitarians, and I've talked about that in previous episodes. Your view is a bit different than that. So, well, Let's talk about how that came up at the conference.
Well, I think if you've ever been to a Christian conference, you know that the best conversations happen late at night.
Yes.
When everyone's guard is down and we're all, just ready to talk about the stuff maybe you don't feel like we can talk about in the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about some of the challenges of coming together as Unitarian Christians, broadly speaking, Unitarian Christians.
Yeah.
And one of those issues is the question of preexistence. We're all in agreement that the Father alone is the only true God. But within this Unitarian community, there are some of us who believe that Jesus came into existence at his conception in the womb of Mary. These folks style themselves as Biblical Unitarians.
Yeah.
And then there are those of us who believe that Jesus was the first and greatest of God's works, that he was created before the world began. And we tend to style ourselves as Arians. And so we kind of started to talk about that.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions going back and forth because, well, I hadn't actually sat with somebody who had your particular view and discussed it at length. So we kind of grilled you a bit with questions. I hope it wasn't too strange.
It wasn't, and I thrive under those conditions. I did collegiate debate and I'm used to tough questions, but it was really a delight for me because I have seen that lack of direct engagement between Biblical Unitarians and Arians, having direct conversations about these issues. And so to be able to answer those kinds of questions, to get your understandings of these issues of preexistence, of, what does that mean, the Bible texts that are involved in this question, and to be able to have a normal, polite Christian dialogue about this face-to-face, I think that's so important. And I hope everyone went away from it edified because I know that I did.
Yeah. Well, I normally don't have episodes where I'm like, hey, explain a theology, because I like to hear people's stories. You did a very nice job of explaining your perspective in a succinct way that I could see where you were coming from, and I appreciated that. Do you mind repeating that here?
Well, I think that if a person is going to identify as an Arian in the 21st century, I think that there are two fundamental, non-negotiable aspects of that belief. The first is that the Father alone is the only true Almighty God. The second is that Jesus is the first and greatest thing that God ever brought into being. These are the two pillars, I would say, of Arian belief.
Okay. The term Arian for your views is not something that everybody likes. Some people think that that's not completely accurate. He was just a guy, was a part of a controversy. Though I don't know another term to use for it. What are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I'm very sensitive to the concerns about the use of the term Arian, because throughout the centuries since Arius, Arian has really been nothing but a theological slur, and was often attached to people who weren't even Arian. Many Socinians or Biblical Unitarians were called Arians because it was just synonymous with a denial of the Trinity or denial of the essential deity of Christ. But the reason that I think it's important is, one, we need to assign ourselves a label before those who disagree and oppose us assign us a label first. So when I call myself an Arian, I get the jump on somebody who wants to call me an Arian as an insult.
I see. It's not so much an insult if you've already done it.
Exactly. Yeah. And another reason why is not so much because I'm trying to recover the teachings of the historical Arius. That's not about it for me. Really, my theology is coming from the Bible, not anything that Arius wrote.
Okay.
It's important for me because it allows me to use a term and then assign a particular definition to that term. So like I explained, I believe that the essential points of Arianism is that the Father alone is the only true God, and that Jesus Christ is the first and greatest thing that God ever brought into being. So now that I've gotten the jump, I've assigned myself the term Arian, I've assigned a definition to it, and then that kind of gives me more ground to be able to have productive conversations with people about what I believe.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I mean, we face the same thing even with the word Unitarian.
Absolutely.
Because people have a conception of what that means. They assume it's
Unitarian Universalist.
Yeah. So when we named the UCA Unitarian Christian Alliance, we had these kinds of debates like, well, if we name it that, and then we say what that means, I never thought of it as getting the jump, but in a way, that is what we're doing. It's like we're making it very outright.
Right.
This is what it is, and here's the statement, the affirmation. This is what it is we believe.
Yeah.
There are a lot of biblical Unitarians in the Unitarian Christian Alliance, and I know that's a smaller set of the Arian view. But your explanation for how it was that Jesus was still a human, which is actually part of the Unitarian Christian Alliance affirmation, there are a lot of people who think, well, how can that be? I appreciated your answer. Let's do that part.
Yeah. We as Arians, are in total agreement with, the broader Unitarian community that Jesus was human. My understanding of who we are as human beings is that we are a body-soul composite.
Okay.
So when God created Jesus, you have this human soul who is the person of Jesus Christ. And in the incarnation, he is united with a body that has been prepared for him, like it talks about in Hebrews.
Okay.
And so you have a human soul with a human body, which is no different than myself being a human soul and a human body. And so this is not Almighty God divesting himself of his eternal properties, but this is the union of a human soul with a human body. This is what Barton Stone believed. This is what Isaac Watts believed and others, and this is what I believe myself.
Okay. The difference between Jesus as a human and normal people as a human was just the timing of the soul, in your view.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And it does raise some other questions.
It does, absolutely.
But, and I'm going to irritate some people here, I don't feel like we need to answer those here. I think that's something that we could do.
We table that for another time.
Yeah. I don't want this show to be about, hey, let's debate theology. I think that's enough information that somebody would hopefully go, okay, I see where he's coming from.
Yep.
I can think about that.
Sure.
The internet is wide and broad, and there's all the information anybody would ever want.
For sure.
I would ask you, though, for clarity,
Yep.
even within Arian views, they don't all agree either. So would you say yours is a majority view, a vast majority view, a minority?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it's hard to get a read because there are not a lot of established Arian churches like you might see. Like, okay, there's the Church of God General Conference, and there's the Christadelphians, and maybe some of these other biblical Unitarian churches. I do know that historically speaking, this is a view that was quite often defended, but it's not an issue that is as hotly debated among Arians as some others, because the recognition of Jesus having a preexistence is more important than trying to nail down his nature before the preexistence. So we all agree that Jesus was human. What was going on before that, the biblical evidence is less specific. So we get less specific, which I think is important.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about the Church of Christ is that we have a saying that says, where the Bible speaks, we speak, and where the Bible is silent, we're silent. So I speak about preexistence because I think that the Bible teaches it. Other people disagree, that's fine. We can have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
As to the specific constitution of who Jesus was before the preexistence, I think that we do get some biblical evidence, but not enough to be dogmatic. So you're going to find some Arians who agree with me on this issue, and then you're going to find some who would say, well, no, we think that Jesus was something different. But the key here, and I really want my biblical Unitarian friends to understand this, is that we all believe that at the virgin conception, Jesus was human. He was totally human. He was not some kind of a God-man composite, but he was a human being just like any other one.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, we did stay up pretty late that night, and I think quite a few people in that conversation came away understanding what you were saying way better than they had before.
Right.
And it's not that they agreed, and this is an important thing, it's that they understood what you believed well enough that they could now talk to you about it.
Right.
And that was a really great place to end up that night.
Yeah, that to me is, I am so weary of contentious theological arguments. I enjoy debate. I think debate is a great thing, but the wrangling and the attacking and the mudslinging in the name of Christ over theology, I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of that. And so I think what you said is so important. It's not that we anybody changed anybody's minds. We all went away believing what we believed when we started, but we moved the needle in terms of understanding. And that's really my goal in all of this as I try to talk about these issues, whether it be with my Trinitarian friends, whether it be with Biblical Unitarian friends, whether it be with non-believers, whoever I'm talking to, whatever I'm talking to them about, is to move that needle of understanding a little bit more, and hopefully we can come to, God willing, a more of a unity in truth as we're all searching these issues out with open hearts and open Bibles.
Yeah. I appreciated your willingness to participate in that because, I mean, you were the odd man out at that moment, given that the rest of us were Biblical Unitarians. And it meant a lot to me to see that you were smiling and we were all enjoying those moments. So,
yeah, I wish it was recorded because I think that these kinds of things should be a model for how we should talk to each other.
Oh, man, I could have brought a recorder and just made that a podcast episode.
Right.
It would have been about 2.5 hours long, but it would have been a really interesting episode. So what I find interesting now, you have dabbled with the witnesses for the purpose of exploring theology in a different context. You still attend a Church of Christ church. You went to the conference surrounded by Biblical Unitarians. You've gone a lot of directions in this. I'd like to know where you are right now and what you see happening in your life and in your ministry.
Well, when you put it that way, you make me sound a little more theologically promiscuous than I probably am. But I am definitely in the Christian churches and churches of Christ. You know, this is the tradition that I was raised in, that I was baptized in, that I've ministered in, and that I really believe in. Mm-hmm. And there have been times where I walked away and, you know, I couldn't stay away. I had to come back. So this is really a home for me. But a big part of that is our commitment to non-sectarianism. So I'm not looking at what people call themselves. I'm more so looking at what they believe and how they practice. So somebody can call themselves a Biblical Unitarian. Okay. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God?
Yeah.
You know, is he the Lord of your life?
Yeah.
All right, well then, you know, let's stand on that regardless of what you call yourself. In terms of long-term ministry plans, when the elders of my church understood that I did not believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, I was removed from the positions of leadership that I had. So I had been a preacher, one of two, and I was no longer able to do that. I was not disciplined. I was not kicked out of the church, but it was a clear censure. I left the church for about a year, really 14 months, as I prayed and asked God to show me where to go and what I should do. And it was around the time that I was at the conference, within a month or so, really, that I felt like I received the answer, which was that it was time to go back. It was time to go back to the church and to serve in whatever way that I could. And so that's what I'm doing right now. The members are happy to have me back, and I'm happy to be with them because I love them and we're family.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm just focused on edifying them and building them up in the ways that I can and inviting others into what we're doing in Cincinnati. My desire has always been to do ministry in Mexico, and there are still some opportunities that I have open to do that. And I guess I would try to encourage people and say that just because you come to accept what I think is a biblical view on the doctrine of the Trinity, that does not mean that God's not going to use you. That doesn't mean that's the end of your ministry plans. It may look different than what you thought to begin with, but I have seen that the best is yet to come in terms of what the Lord is doing in my own life, and I know in the lives of many others who have walked this road before me.
Yeah. So have they put you back in any of the positions yet, or are you still kind of in the...
So, yeah, it is, well, I've only been back for a couple weeks, and I'm ready, but those are kinds of things that have to be worked out first with the elders of the church and to see what they're comfortable with.
Okay. And you know Spanish pretty well, so that's why you want to go to Mexico.
Right. I do. It's actually the other way around. I wanted to go to Mexico long before I knew Spanish. So I went to Mexico in 2011 for the first time when I was 16, 17 years old. I didn't know a lick of Spanish, except all the stuff that we know, donde está el baño, and where's the bathroom and all that fun stuff.
Right.
And I went back again in 2012, August of that same year, and really began to discern a desire to do ministry in a Spanish-speaking context. Well, in order to do that, you need to know Spanish.
Yeah.
And it was actually a couple of years later, after I did a 3-month internship in Mexico, that I said I really need to buckle down and start to learn. So that was in 2014, and I've been learning and practicing and speaking ever since.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I hope that opportunity arises at the right time and you get wonderful opportunities in Mexico.
I appreciate that.
I assume you've probably mentioned to some people in the church who were not pleased with your theological change that Stone wasn't Trinitarian. Does that information resonate with them at all, or what does that mean to them? Because I would expect many Church of Christ people to find that fascinating and potentially interesting enough to look into it. What was your experience?
Well, it doesn't carry as much weight as you might think because we are a biblicist movement. So simply mentioning the fact that Stone was not a Trinitarian, it helps soften the blow for people to know that I'm not just getting this out of nowhere. They can't completely throw me out without cutting out a huge part of our history, because he was not the only non-Trinitarian, but he was certainly the most prominent.
Yeah.
But it doesn't carry much weight in terms of maybe changing their mind or maybe leading them to do some more research. But I don't want to downplay the softening the blow part, because I think that's important. I think that many people who I was not expecting to give me space have given me space because of that. They recognize that this is actually a legitimate part of our movement, that maybe there's something to this to a certain extent. And so it's, they're not trying to root me out, in that sense.
After we got back from the conference, I friended you on Facebook officially. And so I saw some of your posts.
Yeah.
And you had a post about your trip back from the 20s and 30s conference. I thought it was really cool. Do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. So I was somewhere around Louisville and stopped at a Burger King. As I was in the drive-thru, I saw a lady who was out back, and she was clearly upset. She was messing with her phone. It looked like she was going to cry. And I said, you know what? I want to give that lady a Bible. This is something that I do. I hand out Bibles in Cincinnati. I always have Bibles with me, usually have Bibles with me. Evangelism is really my heart cry.
Yeah.
But I was really feeling quite resistant. I knew that I had forgotten to stock up on Bibles before I left. And I don't do a lot of what I call cold evangelism. So just walking up to people for the purpose of giving them a tract or a Bible. So I'm pretty sure that I circled that parking lot at least twice, looking for an excuse either to not give her a Bible or hoping maybe she would walk back inside and then, oh, whoops, I missed my opportunity. Yeah. But the more I went back and forth about it, the more I felt like, I just need to be obedient. I just need to go up and do it.
Okay.
So I found I had one Bible left in the trunk of my car with a coffee stain on it. I said, I guess this will do, King James Version. And I walked up to this lady and I said, hi, I saw you, and I just felt like I wanted to give you a Bible. And without looking up from her phone, she said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And I'll be honest with you, I like to think of myself as kind of having the right words. I started stumbling and bumbling, and I had just spent the past 3 days with all of these Christian people, deep theological conversations. I had kind of forgotten that was an option. I really didn't know what to say in that moment. But I just told her, listen, I'm going to leave the Bible here if you want it. And I walked away. And to be honest, I fully expected her to pick it up, maybe just out of courtesy of nothing else. I got back in my car and I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw her get up, the Bible still on the ground, and walk inside. And I was disappointed. I've done this enough to know that God entrusts to us in obedience and we entrust to him the results. But nonetheless, when someone doesn't take it, you feel a little crestfallen.
Yeah.
But I felt like, okay, I did what I was supposed to do. And who knows, maybe that witness in and of itself will be something.
Yeah.
But as I was driving away, I saw a young man come out of the Burger King, and he sat down on a milk crate and he picked up the Bible and he started reading it. And I was over the moon. I could not believe what I was seeing. I stopped at a red light and I took a picture. I was so surprised. And the neatest thing about that was that I had written my name and number in the Bible, and if someone needed to, contact me. And I think it was a day or a couple of days after the conference that young man actually texted me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he texted me asking for some more information, and we've been having a text dialogue back and forth since then. So,
oh, wow, that's a surprise.
It's just God. I thought I knew what he was doing, but, like always, he's a million steps ahead.
Yeah, right. He was like, there, Eric. I've got this covered. You just go ahead.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I appreciate your time today, the story, and I really appreciate getting to know you at the conference, and I look forward to the next time we have a chance to meet.
Absolutely. Hopefully it's not too long, but I look forward to the next conference.
Yeah. There is the UCA Conference coming up in the fall. You might want to put that on your calendar.
Oh, it's already on my calendar.
Thank you very much, Eric, and I wish you well in your ministry and your work at the church.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless.
Thank you, Eric. Since I know you put the UCA Conference on your calendar, I'm going to keep the pressure on you to make sure you make it. And if your car is giving you troubles, I'll pick you up along the way.
Hello. Thank you for the UCA. I think it's a beautiful group, and we'll be able to do more great things for the glory of the one true God, our Father, and His Son, the human Messiah, the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you so much. God bless.
That was anonymous, but that's okay. Thank you. And I'm glad this effort is a blessing to you. The Converge event from 2019 has come up several times, and I'm working on ideas for an episode specifically about that, an episode to help fill in some details for those who missed it. The UCA Conference will be much simpler, academic presentations, and a lot of fellowship time. There won't be provided childcare, but there will be some extra space, and the location has a playground. October 15 through 17 in Millersville, Tennessee, north of Nashville. The final steps in the registration are being configured now. If you've been meaning to become a member on the UCA website and a part of the directory, and you want to be among the first to be told that registration is open, this would be a good time to sign up. UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. Signing up is free, but there is an option to be a supporting member. As a small bonus, supporting members get discounted tickets. Of course, the UCA Conference is not the only reason to be a member of the UCA. But if seeing some of these people in person means as much to you as it does to me, then you'll not want to wait. Capacity is limited. Some of my podcast guests will be there, so there will be people there that you know. You just haven't met yet. I don't know how many, but at least a few. That's reason enough to go right there. And then Keegan Chandler in the dunking booth. And the raffle to throw a whipped cream pie in the face of Brandon Duke. Okay. You'll get to meet some great people and make many new friends. There. If you have vocal feedback, there's a record link in the show notes or on the podcast webpage, podcast.unitarianchristianalliance.org. If you just want to email, go for it. podcast@unitarianchristianalliance.org. Eric, thanks for being a great example of stepping out. You took a risk to show up cold at an event like that, and the risk paid off. Thanks. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.